joining us today for the Steve Fund's Community Conversation, Comfort and Joy, Overcoming Holiday and Everyday Family Stress. My name is Monica Inkovet, and I am the Director of Programs and Partnerships of the Steve Fund. The Steve Fund is the nation's leading organization focused on supporting the mental health and emotional well-being of young people of color. Our community conversations are free public series that brings mental health experts into conversation with the larger Steve Fund community around timely topics to promote and support the mental health and well-being of young people of color. Today, we are fortunate to have Dr. Beal, a Steve Fund mental health expert, who will help us understand some of the current stressors that impact our mental health, including the holidays, social injustice, and the pandemic. She will also share some coping skills and self-strategies to promote emotional well-being in families. A little background on Dr. Beal. Dr. Janice Beal is a researcher, clinician, author, and behavioral expert. Her leadership and administrative experiences include president of Beal Counseling Associates and Beal Behavioral Health. Currently, she is contracted as a mental health expert for the Steve Fund, where she oversees the Wellbeing in Color Initiative, a peer mental health educational program, and also facilitates support groups for students of color. And now it is my pleasure to pass it over to Dr. Beal.
Thank you, Monica. I really appreciate that introduction. I am excited about having the opportunity to talk today. Comfort and joy, God, it makes you think of all the Christmas carols and all the holidays and all the things that we are about to encompass. And we're right in the middle of it right now because Christmas is only a couple of days away, it seems. We realize that families are so important in everyone's development. If you have children, they look to you for support, they look for you for guidance, they look for you for holiday gifts. So I always like to start off with, what does a holiday mean to you? Really, what does this season bring to you, and what do you think about as you're approaching this holiday season? Sometimes it's filled with comfort, where we're, really at ease. Sometimes it's filled with a lot of happiness, but for a lot of people, the holiday season may not be as happy or as a welcome season or time of the year because things have happened to them throughout their life. And it brings back unfortunate memories. You may have lost someone during the past year. This may be your first year of some type of separation, or it may be your first year coming back together because we weren't able to get together during COVID. So I'd like for each person online to kind of think about, what does the holidays actually mean for me? Next slide, please. Okay, so for a lot of us, it's traditions. Okay, so we have all these traditions that we've done as families. Everybody comes together. One person brings cake, one person brings macaroni and cheese, ham, or you decide you don't want that type of meal, or you may have a Mexican meal for your holiday meal. You may have barbecue. You may have to do anything, whatever your family's tradition is. I want you to kind of think about it right now and think about what that actually means to you. And whether or not you think that it's a good thing or whether or not you think that it's a bad thing. Sometimes we do traditions because we've been doing them and that's the way we do them. But sometimes we have to rethink that and say, maybe that's not what's going to bring about happiness for me or happiness for my family. Next slide, please. So I kind of mentioned in my introduction, what has the past year been for you? Because every year, before it's 2022, before the new year comes in, ABC will do an annual what took place over the year. And they always show people who have gone on, who've passed, things that have happened, whether they are good things or bad things, but a lot of times the reflection is on things that have happened over the past year that may not have been good for us. And sometimes when you see it, it makes you a little bit sadder because you're thinking as you're going into the next year, it has to get better or it has to be better. So that's what we're going to kind of I'd like us to revisit some of the things that have happened in society And as you're looking and thinking about what your year looks like, to kind of put that down, grab a piece of paper. I like interactive type things and start writing down what took place for you in 2021 and 2020, because those were special years, because that's when we went into COVID and that's when we went into the pandemic. Next slide, please. Okay. A lot of things that happen may have been traumatizing to us. And so sometimes we experience things, and trauma is something that's like on an individual basis, but trauma we know affects us. And it's a psychological experience. And it changes the way our thinking, our emotions, our behavior, because it causes a certain amount of distress. And we know that by looking at the numbers that, 1 in 5 people in the US experience mental illness. Um, and only about 50% of that is diagnosed in their lifetime. So, but what we know about what happened during the pandemic is that we've had more people that talk about mental illness and mental health than who have ever experienced it in the past, because of being in the situation of not being able to control what was happening to us, caused a lot of trauma, and it caused a lot of loss for a lot of people. Next slide, please. When we talk about trauma, we know that it's important that we go through a healing process, though, because if you experience something that was traumatic to you and you haven't actually talked about it or processed it, when it stays with you a little bit longer, it kind of gives you to a point where you really are maybe, experiencing depression or anxiety and things of that nature. Now, because we focus on people of color with the Steve Fund, I think it's important to look at some of the things that are experiences that create emotional and mental health stress for us. Because when we talk about stress, and toward the end of the presentation, I'm going to talk about ways in order to alleviate stress, because we have good stress and we have bad stress. And some stressors are the stressors that cause us to be able to do certain things. But when we look at people of color, the stressors that they are experiencing, which means it causes us to do different things. Maybe we have to meet a work deadline or something of that nature. But we know that people of color have different stressors than others because of the fact of microaggression, hate crimes, discrimination, stereotypes, and it has an impact on our mental health. Okay, so therefore, not only we may have experienced the same amount of trauma, but we also have racial trauma and things of that nature that they are encountering, or things that have become important to the individual, and they may not have even realized that they were going through it. And by being traumatized, because sometimes some people have been traumatized and have experienced and worked, haven't really worked through the trauma, there's barriers for seeking help. Traditionally, people of color do not seek help initially. But what has happened during this pandemic has been the fact that it's brought it to the forefront, that we're no longer not talking about. We're having more conversations about mental health and mental wellness than we've had in the past. But we cannot not look at the things that have caused us to get to where we are. Why is there cultural mystery? Able to go and tell somebody about your problems and concerns. Why can't we just leave these, why can't we just figure them out on our own? People are coming to a different realization. And hopefully destigmatizing mental health and mental wellness is what we're trying to do. That's our goal, that's our mission. That's my personal mission, that we get to a place where actually everybody is talking about, how do I become mentally well? Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through some things that have caused stress within the last year, last 18, 19, 20 months. Impact on social injustice on mental health. What we experience, all of the isms. I like to talk about the isms because the isms have always been there, but each one of the isms has a different effect on people. And if you look at the different types and how people, the communities that have been affected, which can be people of color, or it could be LGBTQ community, or other communities that have experienced the impact of social injustice in the fight for the Black Lives Matter movement that took place 2 summers ago. Next slide, please. Of course, we talked a little bit about COVID-19. A lot of people of color were impacted by COVID and experienced a lot of deaths. We even had to do things differently when we talked about death, because death wasn't the same. We just didn't experience death. We couldn't go to funerals anymore. We had to watch them on Zoom, such as Zoom has become a part of our life. It's just automatic. We're going to go on Zoom. So being accustomed to doing Zoom, kids had to stay home. not having a lot of things that we needed in order just to go to technology and the learning curve. So all of those are stressors that people had to experience. Next slide, please. Um, Within that, of course, that was an impact on our mental health. Distancing ourselves. Like I said earlier, when I first started off, last holiday season, we may not have been able to visit our relatives or the people that were older in our family for fear of COVID. Now we have the new variant that's come up. So we're wondering, should we go back, even though people are vaccinated? Not everyone has taken the vaccine. And we want to encourage that to happen because we want people to try to get back to what we consider to be normal. And then we have to figure out what actually is normal. Because when we don't socialize with people and we're people that enjoy being around each other, it does something to someone. It does something to the way they feel or how they feel. They may start to feel loneliness. And think about it, we're in the holiday season. So loneliness is one of the things we look for to try to make sure that people don't feel lonely during this time period. Next slide, please. Okay. So once again, now we've taken, I've taken COVID-19 and the impact. I've taken social injustice that took place during the pandemic, discrimination against, all people of color, not just one group, but people have experienced it throughout time prior to the pandemic. And so it became at a higher rate when we were sitting at home and everybody was watching things that were going on the news. People became fearful of being deported and going back to their home countries because they had come to the United States for refuge, to be able to find a safe space. A high rate of infection for indigenous communities. So disparities that we had prior to that time period kind of were elevated during COVID. So they became stressors for everyone. So whether or not they sought help, people were still afraid even to go get vaccinated because they didn't want to think that somebody would know that they were here and they weren't supposed to be in the United States. So communities and families and people suffered. And I had the opportunity to do a hotline, and I saw children that were calling in because of the fact that they were fearful of their grandparents and other people in their family. So there was a lot of stress going, and it continues to be a lot of stress because kids are just going back to school now. And the stresses of what they were anticipating on going back from something they left, all that creates a great deal of stress. Now, we do all of those things that I'm talking about. And here we are right here at Christmas time, during the holidays, and we're supposed to be happy. We're gonna figure out what that actually means. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is just a little bit of a combination of some of the social injustices and the racial things that took place. But what I talk about mostly is the fact that during the time period of George Floyd, that was the first time that we'd actually watched someone lose their life. So regardless of your ethnicity at that particular time, the whole world stopped. So it wasn't just in the United States, it was across the globe, across the continents. They watched someone who actually lost their life during that time period. And the trauma, remember we talked about trauma, the word trauma I was using earlier. The traumatic experience had an impact and people really didn't know because we couldn't go out and talk about it. We were only able to get that information into our homes. And of course there were people who went out in March during that time period, even though the pandemic and COVID was very high because they felt really, really passionate about trying to do something and making a change. So I just kind of wanted to look at all of, right here we have highlighted, Breonna Taylor and all of the people that were constantly being discussed. It says I have right here that people of color have experienced distraction, anger, stress, fear, and worry about their safety. Next slide, please. Okay. So when you look at something that's taken place for young people, for your children, even for yourselves or your husband, and you're trying to process this as an individual, it does create stress. It does create anxiety, which can often lead to mental health disorders that would need some type of assistance in order for a person to be able to make it through. As you see, I've listed a study of different studies that are on the screen that talk about, police shootings, psychological distress, and we compare that with the African American community to the white community, and we see that the numbers are higher. Okay, there's a great deal of distress that takes place for people of color who traditionally have been traumatized and are now trying to make it and trying to adjust and trying to understand what that actually looks like for them. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does it all mean? What are we trying to do? What am I talking about? I've started off, the title is called Comfort and Joy. So I'm looking, if you're on me for the first time, you're trying to think, well, where is the joy in all of this? I do believe that the foundation of how we start in understanding through education about mental health, mental wellness helps us get to the actual how, and how do we overcome it, and how do we make ourselves better individuals, or how do we adjust to the day-to-day lives. Our mental health involves our effective functioning in our daily activities. That's how productive are we in school? How productive are we in work as caregivers, as females? Caregiving is a part of, I think, of our DNA. If it's not, it's taught the role very early that we give and give and give. And so therefore, how is my mental health affected? If I'm not okay, am I really doing the best job that I can? Am I giving so much that I'm not taking time for myself? How do I adapt to change? How do I grow throughout this process? And so when we're trying to get to mental wellness, it's a state, and I want you to look at this definition. It's a state of well-being in which an individual realizes that their own abilities can cope with normal stresses of life, where they can work productively and fruitfully and be able to make a contribution to their community. And that's by the WHO Foundation. That's the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization is responsible for giving us definitions about illnesses that we experience. It's kind of like, it's the organ, they meet, and it's like all these thousands of professionals that come together, and they come up with names and things that people will experience, and they put them into symptoms and how we diagnose people. And for a mental health clinician, I use the DSM-5. And for those who may or may not be familiar with it, it's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And it's where we get all the symptoms. And if a person is suffering for certain things for a certain amount of time, that's when we know that we can actually give you a diagnosis. So everybody has experienced depression, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But it's when you become clinically depressed, that's when we want you to seek help. Anxiety, when you cannot function, and it's having an effect on your work or school or your ability to be a good caregiver. So the World Health Organization, that's called the WHO for short, it's kind of really easy to remember because those are the individuals who kind of give us these names. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm giving you a little background about what could possibly have affected us during this time period, these last 20 months. What does that look like? Things that you may not have even thought about that had an impact on your life. That was coming in, the information that was coming to you, but you didn't realize how emotionally or mentally it was actually maybe having an impact. So by thinking of things and talking about things, and that's what's so good about therapy and about counseling and the whole process, that we're able to talk and we're able to try to think about how can we make a change. So next slide, please. One of the things that if you are a caregiver and if you are preparing for the holidays and that you're doing all these things, and you have to determine, I always ask, since you have your piece of paper that I asked you to get earlier, you look at what's a stressor for you. And I'd like for you to draw a line down the middle. And on the line, I'd like for you to put the things on the left-hand side that are stressors for you, and things on the right-hand side are what you could actually get rid of. So we're in the holiday season. Is it really important that I go grocery shopping, or can I let someone else go grocery shopping for me? Is it really important that I make sure that we have all this major meal? Would my family be okay if we didn't do as much? Is it really important that I spend money that we don't have? A lot of times I think we've gone away from things, and we just buy things in order to replace interactive abilities. But in the pandemic, we had to spend time together, so people were able to reconnect with their families and to understand, it's okay to not have this big toy because we couldn't go out and purchase it. So we had to figure out how to make times together and how to do happy times, how to connect with people that we couldn't see anymore. So with doing those things, and as you're looking at what's really, really significant and what's really, really important at this time, first of all is self-care, okay? Because Even as a mental health professional, if I don't take care of myself, I can't give to others. I cannot be the best that I can be if I'm not, quote unquote, okay, and not actually taking time for me. So, and how does that happen? Because a lot of times you'll hear, well, let's do this and we'll do that. All these things that I'm giving you right now. But then you really think about it. I said, if nobody's actually said, how do I eat right? How do I know if I'm eating right? I just know I'm supposed to do from the food groups. But how do I know what the portion is like? Physical exercise, we say that all the time, but what does that actually mean? You know, do I do jumping jacks? Do I do push-ups? Do I do sit-ups? You know, what do I actually do? So this may take a little bit of extra work on your part, but to decide what is it that you can do that can help you to be a better individual and taking care of you. And it's so hard because people, we just don't want to do it. We don't think about it. We just think about others and we think about providing for others. This right here, rest, part of the program that we've been doing, Wellbeing in Color, it's really important that I'm teaching adolescents and we're teaching middle schoolers about the importance of rest and the importance of sleep. To be able to have those 8 hours, because if you don't take the time out, your body just can't function. So some people say, I don't need a lot of sleep. Well, you may not need a lot of sleep, but let's rest at different times of the day. You may have to take a nap like we did when we were children. And you know what? When they wake up, they're totally refreshed. Mindfulness, it's a process of where we think positive thoughts and positive things. Breathing exercises. If we have time toward the end of the presentation, I'll teach you how to breathe. We'll actually do breathing exercises. I've done it with thousands on Zoom. That's one good thing about Zoom. It's allowed me to do things that I wouldn't do if I had people in the same amount of room. And social connection. And we got to get rid of that. And we have to limit our media exposure. I use the term toxic because the things that I mentioned earlier that were negative things that were coming into our home, if we repeatedly let that information come in, it does have an impact on our mental health. Next slide, please. Okay. So why are the holidays considered stressful? Well, you have hopefully you have your piece of paper in front of you and you're going from left to right and you're scratching out things that are not really important. Because for each one of us, the stressfulness comes. You know, stress is a process. These are objectives to go for a little bit further. And what does that actually mean? How do we recognize the holiday stress? What are the indicators of stress? Why do we need to, and how we need to learn to reduce that amount? Next slide, please. Okay, I'm gonna give you a good definition. Anything that stimulates you and increases your level of alertness. Stress is usually perceived as pressure and strain with a sense of urgency attached. I gotta do it, I gotta do it. But remember, I said there's good stress and then there's bad stress. Next slide, please. Okay. Stress management is the ability to keep yourself at a level of stimulation that is healthy and enjoyable. Life without stimulus would be incredibly boring and dull. Life with too much stimulus becomes unpleasant and exhausting and can cause mental health concerns. If you're functioning at a high level and you never are able to come down and you're not able to take care of yourself, then it becomes on the negative part of your body functioning because the adrenaline is constantly running and then eventually you just become exhausted. Next slide, please. Okay. So what are the sources of stress? Well, we talked about holidays, overwork, environmental, internally generated stress. Some of us are so high strung that we kind of create stress for ourselves. Could be a good stress, Euro stress, or it could be what we consider bad stress. And survival stress. We have to take care of our families. We have to be able to afford, but we don't have to go buy the kids the tennis shoes. You guys, if you've looked at the price of tennis shoes for adults and parents, they're unbelievable. What happened to the regular tennis shoes? Guess what? They get everybody to the same place at the same time. Next slide, please. So here's three things I'd like for you to look at. We have physical stress that's causing us a physiological component. We have behavioral stress that causes us to behave a certain way. And then we have emotional stress, which is mental stress. Next slide, please. Just so that you have just kind of like a little baseline. So if it's a physiological process of something that's causing us stressors in our lives, we have an elevated pulse and our blood pressure, our hands become cold, and our feet, we have sweaty palms. Guess what sounds like I'm getting to? It sounds like I'm getting to anxiety. Because the stress is causing anxiety, which may, ultimately end up in an anxiety disorder. Increased muscle tension, excuse me, our necks and our shoulders. And you're constantly feeling like this, like, God, I can't get rid of this. I'm not sure what's going on. Some people have stomach problems and their appetite changes. They either eat too much or they eat too less, or they're not able to sleep. And inability to focus. The physiological things that I'm talking about also can be anxiety or it can be depression, so it's kind of like to recognize these things if you're experiencing, especially not only during this time of the year, but any time of the year. Next slide, please. Okay, so behavioral things to look at that are indicators of stress. Where let's say that you were really good at doing something, but all of a sudden your level of productivity kind of decreases. You kind of make the small mistakes more frequently than you used to make them. And you're so good at what you're doing that you shouldn't make that mistake. And you're trying to figure out, why am I doing it? I'm trying to meet this deadline. I'm trying to make sure I do this and provide. I have too much on my plate. So you start to make small mistakes that become more frequent. Inability to concentrate on tasks, increased use of drugs and or alcohol. We tend to use drugs and alcohol, or alcohol, not necessarily drugs, depending on the individual, but alcohol as a reliever of stress. Well, I'll have a drink so I'll feel better. But too much alcohol can also cause a problem. Okay, so too much drinking could be, again, if you have a glass of wine, that's okay. But when you start to drink too much in order to relieve the stress, then that's when you're getting into the problem areas. Loss of interest, lethargic, and prone to accidents. Next slide, please. Okay, so emotional. I talked about the physical, behavioral, and now we're talking about the emotional, the three main factors. Irritability, where if you find yourself being, irritable, angry, more frequent, not wanting to laugh as much, are anxious about situations. I mentioned the sweaty palms and what was going on. Feelings of worthlessness, not feeling good about who you are, tendency to blame others, feeling lonely. You can be in a room of people and still feel lonely. And people say, well, I don't know why, or I'm in a relationship, but I still don't feel good about myself, or I don't feel like I'm around. Emotional outbursts and crying. Or you could be totally different and have the hostile and the aggression that comes out. So stress can cause a great deal of things just when we're looking at something that has only 6 letters and has all this major impact on us and how we function. Next slide, please. So it becomes important that we understand how to manage our stress effectively, that we understand what is stressful for us, and that we try to figure out what we can do in order to decrease it. That becomes the most important thing. So here's some things that I've come up with and other people have come up with as well. The first thing, even though I have it for number 3, is to learn how to say no. Okay, because I'm going to take number 3 and I'm going to push that to number 1 for myself. Okay, because I have a tendency to say, oh yes, I can do it. I got it, no problem. And then all of a sudden, when it becomes time to do it, it's like, oh my God, I should have said no, because I feel the pressure. And others, I'm sure that you would say the same thing. So learn how to, and you know what? I realized that when you do say no, people still like you. People still, and maybe they even maybe respect you even more by saying no than if you wouldn't have said okay. So when you're looking at this holiday activity, maybe you shouldn't host it at your home. Maybe if you have between now and Christmas, we have like 2 weeks, getting all of your home ready for the holidays may be too stressful. Maybe you say, let's go to somebody else's house, even if your house has traditionally been the house that people have come to. Create a routine, come up with a schedule, decide what you can do during this time period for the next 2 weeks. Change what you can, understand what you cannot change, and then ask for help. Okay, it's not okay. It is okay. Excuse me. It is okay not to be okay, but it is okay to ask for help when you're trying to figure out how you're going to do and how you're going to maintain this holiday. If you can't afford something, it's okay to let your children know that I may not be able to give that to you now, but I may be able to give it to you at a later date. Children will understand because they just want your love. It's not about. It's really not about the tennis shoes or the things that they get. It's about whether or not they feel cared for and whether or not they feel secure. Those are the most important things that children really, really benefit from. Share responsibilities, don't take everything on, and eating the right foods. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean chocolate? Maybe not. Okay, but that means the things that give us energy. We limit our caffeine. I have a tendency to drink, and I will admit, my drink is Dr. Pepper and hot tamales. Everybody says, "Oh my God, how can you?" Those are about the two most energy boosters I've had, but those are the worst energy boosters for me, because after I've come off of that high, I'm just exhausted. So I know that I shouldn't be drinking, several sodas a day, or I shouldn't be, the combination of hot tamales. So it's kind of like doing what we know, especially during the holiday time period, of what's going to make us better, not taking on extra responsibilities, not overspending, thinking I can make the money later. Why put yourself through that pressure and you're paying for Christmas in August? It's not, you'll learn that it's not worth it, and you can change your routine. Next slide, please. Um, Exercise regularly. Okay, so what do I mean? Sometimes you can do exercises while you're sitting in your chair. Okay, you don't have to do this. You can start off with stretchers, and as you increase, and you go online, and there are lots of videos that you can look at. There's an app that I refer everybody to. And let me see if I can find it real fast, because I've forgotten. It's about it's a breathing app. And it allows you to listen to it's called Waves. My goodness, I didn't think about it. It's Waves, and it's free. It allows you to exercise, and also allows you to relax. It gives you different options, and you hear the ocean. So I do it in therapy. So it's really important that we try to make sure that we have something that's going to allow us to exercise. And of course, we're back at the sleep. Sleep is important. Learn to forgive and forget. If you're angry and you're holding on to that anger, the only person that is affecting is you. Okay. So you have to learn to let go of things, and remember to smile and to have fun. I mean, if it's really the season, if someone is no longer here with you, the memories of that person, I'm not saying to forget them, because it's hard for everybody if you lost your parents, or someone, or family members, such as myself. But this time around, I start to think about things that made them laugh, or things that were funny, and it takes away the pain a little bit. So remember to have fun with others, and as you're coming back into the season of reconnecting with people doing at the end of where we are, not the end, but where we are in this pandemic. Next slide, please. Okay. So I keep talking about the pandemic. So coming up with different ways, and you're going to see that a lot of things that are on here are things that I've already repeated or stated more than once. And there's one thing about when we're talking to people, if you say things 3 times, they usually remember it. Learning how to take care of yourself, learning how to be able to know when you're under a great deal of pressure. If you have that piece of paper in front of you, I want to see how many things you've actually moved to the right-hand side that you can get rid of in your life. Taking time to really, really take care of you and your family. And the fact that you're on this presentation at this particular time tells me that you really want to know how to do those things, and how to take care of your body, how to do deep breathing exercises, how to get into your own space and mindfulness, and to have a happy time just with you before you start to expand and teaching others. So these are some really, really important things, I think, that make a difference. Um, taking time to unwind. People say, Dr. Beal, I don't have any time. My day is already full. Well, if you get up a little bit earlier than everybody else, guess what? That creates time for yourself. That gives you time to be able to do something. Next slide, please. Okay. Taking care of your friends and your family can be stressful. However, it can be balanced with care for yourself. Helping others cope with their stress, such as providing social support, can also make your community stronger. During times of increased social distancing, people can still maintain social connections and care for their mental health and mental well-being. For those who we still cannot connect with during the holidays, a phone call or video chats still become important. Your loved ones need that connection to be able to know they're not alone and not to feel isolated. So at this time, I think this probably concludes the presentation, and we're at the Q&A section. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, and we can talk about some of the things, or be able to share. I would hope to be able to share with you some of the things that I've helped others do. I've also taken you through our well-being in color curriculum that I use for our students. from an adult perspective. So, and it's definitely made a difference. Okay, any questions that we have, or please put them into the chat room. I'm assuming that is that what we're asking people to put our questions?
Actually, we're asking them to put into the Q&A section.
Oh, okay, okay. So do we want to give them a time, or do we want me to go into the breathing exercises? What do we want to do?
Um, you know what, Dr. Beal, I think that was fantastic information that you shared with us. And so maybe we can use a little time to ask you some questions and wait to see if participants have something to add. But I just wanted to know, you just gave us such fabulous information. I know for me, one thing that resonated was, make major changes gradually. Sometimes we put that stress on ourselves, right? To be like, okay, I'm going to exercise every day to change, or I'm going to go on a diet and change. So I loved that idea of making changes gradually. But I also wanted to take, let me see, there is a question in the Q&A. How can we stop overcommitting in the moment, was a question.
Okay, very um, good question, because I've talked about minimizing stress and being able to take care of yourself. And in the moment, I think a lot of times we are people, and people want to please others. We do. We want to be accepted by others. We want to please them. So therefore, we may say yes when we really don't mean yes, or we hadn't had a chance to think about it. If you're trying to determine if that's something that you really want to do, tell the person you'll get back with them. Okay. Allow yourself time to think it through as far as whether or not that's something that you want to be able to do. Minimizing the amount of stress becomes your responsibility, and therefore you can set your own priorities. Don't do the things that have you traditionally been done. Let's say, hey, we're just going to have hamburgers. I mean, I'm just being a little drastic, but there may be some people that are making those changes. So ask for time before you respond. Say, can I get back with you? Or can you give me a few moments? I'll call you back in a few minutes and I'll let you know whether or not I can do what you're asking me to do. And then it's okay. Remember, it's okay to say no. It really is okay. If that person can't accept that, then maybe it's time to kind of distance yourself, because if you say, I really need some time, I've been overworked, I've put out more than I can handle at this point, I need to kind of like take a moment. Let me see if I can actually make that happen.
Thank you. That sounds great. We do have another question. What if we are like really experiencing crippling anxiety and finding it hard to get to a psychiatrist? Do you believe there are natural ways to cope with crippling anxiety, was a question.
Okay. Yes, unfortunately, the pandemic has created a high demand for psychiatrists. And remember, when are seen by a psychiatrist, that's for medication purposes as opposed to being seen by a therapist for counseling techniques. There are certain things because when you're in counseling and you're trying to understand anxiety, the main purpose is trying to understand the cause factor. But there are things that you can do on your own, and that is learning how to breathe. That is, downloading some apps that may be from the App Store that create a calmness for you, understanding what it's like to be able to stop in the moment and being able to relax and being able to say, I just got to take a few minutes, to breathe and understand why am I so anxious about this situation? Why does this person bring a lot of anxiety when they come into the room? What is it about me that's triggered to be able to respond to that individual? Those are the things that you kind of need to ask yourself until you're able to actually get to professional help. Getting on the list, the holiday seasons are very high strung, so appointments may be limited, but there are call-in lines that you can call in. I said earlier that I worked on hotlines before. There are hotlines where you can actually call in and talk to people that will also help you get to those techniques and being able to manage the anxiety. Because when we diagnose people with generalized anxiety and the phobias and fears that come along with that, there's certain criteria and there's certain length of times in order for it to actually get the diagnosis. Because people can say, I feel anxious. Well, I feel anxious about a lot of things. Every time I get ready to speak, it causes a certain amount of anxiety. But what things that really, really make me anxious, that are keeping me from focusing are keeping me from achieving, then those are the things that we actually seek help for. So
I
I
have
think,
another question here that and I know we're getting lots of questions because everybody's really wanting to hear your advice. Someone is saying, what are the best ways to support college students with learning to balance mental health and wellness and academics?
oh my God, I love that question as well, because we're about to embark on a program as of tonight, to be honest with you, where I'm going to meet with some college students and we're going to talk about mental wellness and mental health. Because I realized, remember, they're just one step from being adolescents. They're also coming out of the pandemic. So even though they may be in college, are freshmen or sophomores or juniors or whatever their classification, they miss school as well. So they missed that developmental period that we needed in order to be able to get ready for the next level of college that they're experiencing. They're on their own. They're away from home. They may be. They've had a lot of demands. So to tell them to be able to practice some of the things and to talk, it's very important. And we're going to get to the younger kids and the younger generation to be able to know it's okay to go to the counseling center, or it's okay to talk to someone about how you're feeling. Remember, we're also in the season of high suicidal rates and things of that nature. And sometimes people don't know that how to reach out for help. So we're allowing students to we're giving young people that they can text and they can talk to somebody. They're texting with these cell phones all the time. So the resources and things that are important for them to be able to reach out are very, very important, because we don't want them to become depressed. We don't want them to feel a lot of anxiety, but it becomes about balance. Work life. When we talk work life balance, but for them, their work is school. So how do we get them to balance? I send motivational texts to my daughter that's in law school. She's a first year law student, under a lot of pressure, calling in the middle of the night, Mom, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, okay, so I'll start sending motivations texts, and maybe I'll read the scripture with her. Maybe I'll do something, but I send something daily. So reach out to your children on a daily basis. Give them something to hold on to. If they went to school and they had mental health, or they suffered mental health illness prior to, it's important that they're still connected, because it doesn't go away because you change the location. So if they were seeing someone or was seeking help during that time period before they went off to college, it's important that they continue that while they're in college. So they'll be able to learn how to function and have all those other stressors that they have to deal with. So it's important that we stay connected with them, and that we give them resources, and we allow them to be able just to talk. They think they're grown, but they're not really grown. Okay, so that's one thing we have to really learn. They're really still bigger kids. So, giving them that is very, very important.
Yeah, I think that that applies to all of us. We're all just little kids, right? We all want to, we all need that connection. So I appreciate that. I'm going to ask if somebody make sure to um, put in the survey in the chat so people can have a chance to complete it. But Dr. Bill, could you maybe guide us through one of your breathing exercises? Because I think
I thought you'd never ask.
beneficial for all of us.
Sure. If I would have planned it, I would have started the music, because we didn't plan. It's very simple. If you're sitting in a chair right now, I'd like for you to sit back in your chair, put your back to the back of the chair. All you're hearing right now is my voice, and I'd like for you to close your eyes. Now, it's difficult for some people to close their eyes because we have problems with trust. But all I want you to do is to be able to hear my voice as I'm talking to you. And I'd like for you to close your eyes, and I'd like for you to place the palm of your hands on your left leg and your other palm on your right. So you're just going to be sitting there, and your feet are going to be flat on the ground. Your eyes are going to be closed. And you're just going to stop for a moment. You said, I've had all day, all this time. And before I do my next thing, I'm just going to not do anything. And I'm just going to listen. And I'm just going to try to take myself to a place that is a happy space for me. I don't know what your happy space may be. It may be on a beach. It may be something that you haven't had a chance to do. But take your mind and allow your mind to relax and to go to a space. And at this particular time, as you're hearing my voice, I'd like for you to stop, and I'd like for you to breathe in. So breathe in, hold it, and breathe out. Don't think about anything else. Just do what you're doing in the moment right now. Okay, breathe in, hold it, and exhale. Breathe in, hold it, and exhale. Now, you should be feeling, your body should be feeling a little bit of letting down, your shoulders should be coming down just a little bit. Breathe in, hold it, and exhale. You're exhaling out of your mouth. You're thinking about that space. You're thinking about whatever it is that brings you joy. Nobody else in the world matters right now. It's just you and the universe. Breathe in, hold it, and exhale. In, exhale. You're in that space now. Breathe in, and exhale. You're in a happy space. Breathe in, exhale. Your shoulders are dropping more. Breathe in, and exhale. One last time. Breathe in, and exhale. Open your eyes. Very simple exercise. Very, very simple exercise. Hopefully you're in a different space than when you were at the beginning of the presentation. It's very, very important that you get to a space and you do this. The Waves app that I talked about, there's another app called Calm that helps with this process. These are things that you do that don't really cost any money. It just costs a little bit of time. So, Monica, that was a short version, but that's one of the very, very.
I loved it. I loved it. Thank you.
I tell people to make sure they use candles as a part of this process. I love candles. I use them. I have them right here in front of me to get in a calm space, in a calm place. And they'll be able to actually take some of the stress away. Remember, you have control.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beal. This has been such an enlightening and calming and informative presentation. We really appreciate you and your time and your expertise. Thank you so much. I know that I am walking away with some great coping strategies as I face some of my own stresses during the holiday season. And I want to thank all our participants for joining us. Don't forget to go to our website, stevefund.org, for more information and resources. You will also find information about our crisis hotline. Text Steve to 741-741 to speak with the crisis counselor if you want. On behalf of the Steve Fund, we thank you for joining us and we wish you a wonderful holiday season.